Want to try out SQL Server, but you're too cool for Windows? Let's get SQL on Linux. Welcome to this video on installing SQL Server. My name is Kevin Fiesel. I'm the proprietor of Galaxy Services LLC, a consulting firm which specializes in work all across the data platform space, but especially SQL Server. I'm going to bare my soul a little bit with you. I like Linux more than Windows. I've been using Linux since Red Hat 6.0 was in stores, like 1999. I still have a fond place in my heart for Mandrake Linux. It was the first distribution which worked right out of the box for me. RIP Mandrake. Even today, my primary laptop is a framework laptop running Elementary OS. I say all of this because I want to make it clear that when Microsoft announced in 2017 that they were bringing SQL Server to Linux, I jumped for joy, or at least popped for happiness. Rocked my feet for rather pleasant news? I don't know. But I was happy, and there might have been perambulation, so let's leave it at that. Nowadays, SQL Server on Linux has most of the functionality that we can get in Windows, especially when it comes to the database engine. There are still some things which aren't available on Linux, and some of this requires Windows-specific libraries that will probably never get ported to Linux. Some of it is essentially deprecated functionality, like database mirroring or StretchDB. Other stuff might make it at some point in the future if there's enough clamoring for it, so, clamor away. But even with this list of stuff you cannot do in Linux, there's a huge amount which works the same on Linux as it does on Windows. So without further ado, let's get installing.
We have here an Ubuntu-based VM, and at the top I've got a terminal, at the bottom I have Firefox, and what we're going to do is install SQL Server on this Ubuntu virtual machine. So getting started, you can do a quick Google search for the install for Ubuntu. There are other installation guides for SUSE Linux as well as Red Hat Enterprise Linux. If you're using a different distribution, you can probably still get it to work, especially if it's a Debian-based solution. I got it to work, for example, on Elementary OS, but there's no guarantee. So the only supported versions are Ubuntu, SUSE, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So we can go through the installation process. The first step is to grab the Microsoft keys. So we have to get that key and save it. I'll put in my password for this virtual machine, and you can see the PGP public key block. Nothing big there. The next step is to add Microsoft's repo for SQL Server 2022. So in this case, we can see Ubuntu 2004, MS SQL Server 2022. The version of Ubuntu has to be 2004 at this point in time as of recording. The later versions of Ubuntu, even the new LTS for 2204, not supported by Microsoft at this point. It may be supported in the future, but not today. If you want to choose a different edition of SQL Server, let's say SQL Server 2019, you can change that. So you could do 17, 19, or 22. But frankly, if you're getting SQL Server on Linux, let's just get the latest version. So we'll add that repository now. And it takes a moment to get the repo, but we've got it. So the next step is perform an update. I can do that using sudo and say apt-get update. And then install msql-server. So we'll run this command and it will grab SQL Server. Unlike Windows, there's actually not a lot to do for initial installation. Most of this is just automatic install and then configuration after the fact. Now we'll be able to configure it and we can run the msql conf application. So sudo /opt/msql/bin, that's where it is initially. The first thing we need to do is select an edition. So we can see that the edition is something that you will choose, and I'm gonna pick developer. It's free, I can't use it in production, but this isn't production. Then I have to accept license terms, will not sue Microsoft. They do require a SQL authentication account. So on the Windows side, we don't have to have SQL authentication. We can use just Windows authentication, just Active Directory authentication. On the Linux side, SQL authentication is required because Windows authentication, well, Active Directory authentication is a little bit of a challenge. It requires much more effort than what we see in the Windows side. So we must put in a SQL admin account here. The next step is basically start using this thing. So I can check to see if the service is running by running system control and say, check this out. Yep, the service is active. We're good to go there. After that, why don't we try to do something with this? The first thing that I'll do is install curl so that I can grab the Microsoft tools for SQL Server on Linux. And we'll grab the key again. We already have a key, but this is just to make sure that we have the key. Now for this, we're running curl and getting the prod list for Ubuntu 2004, and then turning that into a source locally, msprod.list. So this is a separate repository, and that repository includes things like MS SQL tools and an ODBC driver for Linux. So let's install those. First step is sudo apt-get, and we'll install MS SQL tools. The second one is Unix ODBC-dev. Those two packages are going to be enough for us. We have to accept license terms, so I'll select that, and sure, I accept license terms. After installation finishes here, we'll have those drivers available, and we could connect using SQL command locally. However, I can also get Azure Data Studio for Linux, and I kind of prefer showing you the UI-based approach because we are in a virtual machine that does have a graphical interface. There is no apt-get package for Azure Data Studio, unfortunately, but we can get the .deb file. And I can use dpackage -i to install. So I have to put in sudo because I'm not special enough by myself. And once this package is unpacked, it will install, and then Azure Data Studio will be available for us for use. So I can find it by searching for Azure Data Studio. You can see it right there in the Ubuntu menu. And here we are. This interface, like I mentioned, is very similar to what we see on Windows. It is an Electron-based application, so you'll have that cross-platform compatibility. I'll connect to my local instance using dot, and I have to put in the SA account because that's the only one that exists right now. Once we put it in, we can see that I have all of my databases right here, and I'm going to be able to work with SQL Server on Linux.
Over the course of this video, we downloaded and installed SQL Server 2022 Developer Edition on a Linux VM running Ubuntu. If you watched the prior video on installing SQL Server on Windows, you can see that the process is a bit different, though the end result is that we have SQL Server running on our machine. Before I wrap up, I do want to mention that Microsoft has a set of performance best practices if you are running on Linux, as there are several server configuration settings they recommend you change to ensure that SQL Server runs as fast as it can. We'll have links and show notes in the description below, and until we see each other again in the next video, take care.